Welcome to today's episode where I look into Trevor Milton and his company Nikola, the truck manufacturer. It was supposed to revolutionise the trucking sector with battery electric, fuel cell electric vehicles, and it turned out to be a bit of a scam, hyped by Milton, who, as we'll see, had a track record of, I suppose, to put it nicely, being economical with the truth. I mean, this guy just seemed to scam his way through life. But in doing so, he managed to build a company worth over 30 billion. And at its height, Milton himself had a net worth of over $8 billion. He built partnerships with some of the biggest companies in the automotive industry, and he got orders for thousands of trucks, and it was all achieved on Milton's promises, his hype, and basically his outright lies, deceit. Now, I was familiar with this story because a few years ago I'd listened to an excellent podcast series on it called Bad Bits. And if you want to do a deeper dive into this story, I really recommend that podcast. It's brilliant. But I decided to go back to the story because, first of all, it's a fantastic story, but also because Milton has been back in the news over the last few weeks for reasons that we'll get into near the end. Before we dig into it, a quick reminder. While these shorter weekly episodes released every Wednesday are free for everyone, for just $1.99 a month, you get access to our co-hosted hour-long episodes released on the first of every month, where Keith and I do an even deeper dive into an incredible business story. Now, some of these hour-long episodes are still free in our back catalogue, so you can get a taste of what to expect. As well as getting access to these monthly co-hosted hour-long plus episodes, behind the paywall right now is a fantastic 3-part series on Disney. And over the coming months, we'll be adding more bonus content for subscribers regularly. Also, finally, subscribers will get access to these weekly episodes ad-free, so you won't have to listen to this message again about me talking about how to sign up to our subscriber program. $1, it's great value for just $1.99 a month. You can subscribe via Apple subscriptions, Spotify subscriptions, or on Patreon using the link below, or go to patreon.com/great business stories. So let's dig into Trevor Milton. He was born in 1982 and raised in Utah. Supposedly shaped by the values of the Latter-day Saints, and they'd be, faith, resilience, community. He was one of 5 children in a family that didn't really stay still. There was a lot of moving around from Layton to Las Vegas before eventually settling in Utah when Trevor was 8. Now, his mother, Sally, tragically battled cancer when he was young, and she died when he was just 15. Trevor tried college for a while. He went to Utah Valley State in 2003, but he lasted 1 semester. As one friend later put it, he wasn't much for book learning. He did go on a Latter-day Saints mission to Brazil, where he picked up Portuguese, and this where he honed his salesman pitch, doing door-to-door sales. And of course, as we shall see, he turned out to be a fantastic salesman, or hype man anyway. In 2004, at just 21, Milton launched his first company called St. George Security and Alarm. He moved to southern Utah and he started selling alarm systems door to door, and he quickly built a team. He loved telling people later that he sold the company for over $1 million, but that wasn't true. He actually sold it for around $300,000. His partner only got about 100,000 of that instead of 150. And according to the guy who bought the business, a guy called Glenn Pilz, Milton wildly overstated its value. Pilz pointed out to phantom contracts that obviously didn't exist, that Milton had collected advance payments from customers that didn't make their way to the new owner and should have. This is what Pilz said. He said, things that were baked in as part of the value of the business we had bought weren't really there. They also found out that many of Milton's employees weren't even licensed to sell security systems. So shoddy, shady, and a bit of a glimpse of things to come. Now, by 2009, Milton, he had a bit of cash and he launched U-Pillar. This is a Craigslist site focused on cars. Again, he hyped it hard. In one interview, he claimed that the site pulled in over 80 million online visitors a month. But in reality, of course, it wasn't anywhere near that figure. People estimated maybe a few 100,000 at most. The car site flopped, but he pivoted again, this time into clean tech, and he launched a company called D-Hybrid in 2010. And this company, it retrofitted diesel trucks to run on compressed natural gas, and he even drove a prototype from Utah to Phoenix, and that was to win the business from Swift Transportation, a transport company, and it worked. Swift signed a deal worth up to $16 million, and they paid $2 million up front. But by the end of the contract, only 5 trucks had been retrofitted, and none of them hit the performance levels that Milton had promised. So, of course, Swift sued in 2012. They accused Milton and D-Hybrid of misrepresenting the technology and also defaulting on a $322,000 loan. Milton countersued. He claimed that Swift had stolen his technology. Now, what they were stealing, I don't know, because he had no technology worth stealing. And he also claimed that they had taken advantage of a young, unsuspecting entrepreneur. Now, both lawsuits were eventually dropped, but we can see a pattern here with Milton. Lots of hype, very, very little substance, and Milton then brazenly fighting his corner. This becomes his MO. Now, in 2012, he did come close to an exit. Another company, Sustainable Power Group, in Salt Lake City, they agreed to buy D-Hybrid for $3 million. But again, during the due diligence, they discovered the same problems that Swift had. The technology simply didn't work, and the deal collapsed. S-Power sued, saying Milton misrepresented emissions data and systems performance. That case was also dropped eventually, but by late 2012, D-Hybrid was toast. Now, the reason why these cases dropped is because D-Hybrid was it folded. But Milton rebranded in 2012, his father quietly registered a company called D-Hybrid Systems LLC, virtually the same name, same office, same sign, the old business. But now, the lawsuits and the bad tech or the non-existent technology were gone. And miraculously, by 2014, he landed a buyer, Worthington Industries. They bought 80% of D-Hybrid Systems. The acquisition cost was modest. We don't know the exact amount, but reports would suggest a few million. But crucially, it let Milton cash out. He was able to take up money, and with a story that he could tell that sounded really good. You know, I sold a security company and I sold a tech company. Look how successful I am. But of course, for Worthington, it was a bum deal. The tech didn't hold up. Within a year, the company wrote down $2.3 million, stating that they had overpaid. The systems didn't deliver. His next venture then, in 2015, he borrowed from Tesla's namesake and he set up Nikola and really entered the same territory as Elon Musk, clean transportation. But he wasn't going after cars. He was focusing on the $700 billion US trucking industry with hydrogen fuel cell technology. He was promising zero emissions, zero compromises. That was his pitch. And from 2015 to 2019, Milton, he spun that vision into a multi-billion-dollar promise. And for a while, well, for 4 years, it worked. So he launched it from a basement in Salt Lake City with $2 million in seed funding from Worthington. Now, they had just bought his company and they weren't aware that the tech in his last company didn't really work. So they put in some seed funding. And his pitch was, leaning into his roots. He said, I grew up driving diesel trucks. I got more and more mad every time I go out running and see grey soot everywhere. Finally, I just did it. I don't believe that pitch for 1 minute. From the start, Nikola was pitched as more than just a truck, really. He was pitching an ecosystem. In other words, the hydrogen fuel, the maintenance, the insurance, the truck itself, they were all going to be bundled into this fixed lease rate of 90 cents per mile for 1 million miles. And the specs on his technology that he was hyping were pretty astounding for the time and even for today. It was a 2,000 horsepower rig with up to 1,200 miles of range, and it could be recharged in just 15 minutes. In December 2016, he unveiled the first truck, the Nikola 1, in Salt Lake City. And this was a big event. I really recommend listeners to have a look at the video of this event. So Milton comes on stage and there's a glowing semi-white truck with rock music, flashing lights, and he declares, "This thing fully functions and works." The crowd, of course, filled with investors and trucking execs and enthusiasts, they go nuts. They cheer wildly. But in reality, the truck had no fuel cell. It had no motors. It couldn't move of its own accord. It had to be pushed into place and rigged with hidden batteries to light up the screens. Now, Milton would later claim that certain parts were removed for safety reasons. But that's not what he was saying in 2016. In 2016, the message is pretty clear. Watch the video. He says, this was a hydrogen truck that was working. Now, internally, some of the engineers were alarmed, but this gamble paid off. The hype soared, pre-orders poured in, and Milton had made Nikola look real. And in 2017, he was able to declare that they had over 7,000 pre-orders worth 2.3 billion. And on the back of those kind of promises and that kind of hype, he was able to build key partnerships. And it's the partnerships that really solidified Nikola and made everyone think this is for real. So the first partnership was with Ryder. This is a trucking logistics and leasing giant, and they agreed to distribute and service Nikola trucks across their 800 plus locations. Next came Bosch, the German engineering company. They signed on to co-develop fuel cell components that Nikola didn't have the internal muscle to build. They next did a deal with a company called NEL ASA, or it might be NEL ASA. They're a Norwegian hydrogen company. They were going to build the electrolyzers for Nikola's, get this, 700 hydrogen stations. That's what they were promising. So this was huge. It was expensive. But Milton was spinning a good story. In 2018, South Korea's Hanwha Group invested 100 million into Nikola, pushed its valuation over $1 billion. Hanwha made solar panels, so the pitch was good. It was solar-generated hydrogen to power the zero-emission trucks. So it's full of good partnerships, good stories, because then they landed a deal with Anheuser-Busch, where they committed to buying 800 Nikola trucks. And as Milton boasted, we are building to order, not speculation. And he claimed that Nikola had nearly 9 billion in bookings. He also promised 28 hydrogen stations to support the Budweiser fleet. And then in 2019, they signed a deal with CNH Industrial. This is the parent of truck company Iveco. And they announced a $250 million investment as lead in Nikola's $1 billion Series D round. And this partnership then gave Nikola access to Iveco's production lines and engineering resources. It was a huge, huge deal. And of course, it gave Nikola credibility and scale. And as Milton said at the time, this is the moment people stop doubting us. Few will doubt our ability to commercialise a truck now. And he was right. I remember back then reading the press releases, seeing everything about Nikola, and it was a fantastic story. But of course, this was all theoretical, really. Now they had to deliver. So by 2019, Nikola was now planning a 1 million square foot factory in Arizona. Milton brought on Mark Russell. He was a former president of Worthington Industries, and he was brought in as Nikola's new president. I thought that was a bit strange, seeing as though Worthington had been burnt previously by Milton. But I guess it must show the kind of charisma and salesmanship that Milton has, that he was still able to convince a former president of a company that he'd burnt to buy into this new venture. Or, and I'm just thinking out loud here, maybe it was the possibility or the potential to earn millions, if not tens of millions of dollars, should Nikola have reached its potential. Maybe that kind of blurred Mark Russell's decision making. Who knows? Milton remained on as CEO and the chief hype man, and Russell looked after operations. Big event then happened in April 2019. It was Nikola Worlds was the event, and thousands showed up to this Scottsdale Expo, where Milton revealed 2 new trucks. There was the Nikola 2 and then a European-style truck called the Nikola Tray. This time, though, the trucks actually drove in. The Nikola 2 revved up, rolled out, the crowd went wild. By then, Nikola, or at least Milton anyway, was claiming that they had 13,000 orders. Media coverage was really pretty glowing by this stage, and even skeptics admitted that, Milton was putting on a good show. He was making a good case for the business. In early 2020, they announced that they would skip the traditional IPO route and they would instead go public via a reverse merger with a SPAC, that's a special purpose acquisition vehicle, or acquisition company rather. They were all the rage back in 2020. And the deal valued Nikola at $3.3 billion and brought in $525 million in new funding. As a result of this then, Milton transitioned from CEO to executive chairman, while he also pocketed $70 million in the process. So, nice chunk of change for Trevor there. Nikola's stock soared more than 100% in one single day after Milton tweeted that the company would begin taking orders for its electric pickup truck. This is another new announcement. The pickup truck was going to be called the Badger. And get this, Milton says that the Badger would have a drinking fountain built into it and it would be powered by water from the hydrogen fuel cell. He bragged that his other trucks could make $750,000 per truck by bundling fuel sales. Furthermore, he claimed that 5 Nikola tray trucks were rolling off the line in Germany. None of this was true. But traders piled in, giving Nikola a market cap of close to 30 billion, more than Ford was worth. And Milton's personal stake was worth about 8 billion by this stage. And then, in September 2020, probably the most significant deal for Nikola, they announced a massive partnership with General Motors. Now, General Motors, for this deal, they'd receive an 11% stake in Nikola in exchange for building the Badger pickup and supplying batteries and fuel cell systems. Now, GM didn't put any money into this deal. Nikola would pay GM $700 million to manufacture the Badger. GM also became Nikola's exclusive fuel cell supplier for trucks outside of Europe. So this was a real stamp of approval. As Milton said, avoiding the costs of building a pickup plant and developing a chassis was a big deal for us. Now, Mary Barrett, the CEO of General Motors, said at the time, "We're a very capable team that has done the appropriate diligence." And this kind of begs the question, how much due diligence did General Motors do? And actually, how much due diligence did all the other partners do? I mean, they were pouring hundreds of millions into Nikola. They were ordering 800 trucks, huge contracts. They obviously would have seen prototypes. We know that Nikola did have prototypes. But beyond the prototypes, how much digging did they do? What was there for them to see to justify their faith in Nikola? As a result of the GM announcement, Nikola's stock jumped more than 40%. GM stock rose as well. But not everyone was convinced. The prototypes worked, but how well? The 2016 reveal was a fake, and a lot of insiders knew that, and word was getting out. The hydrogen network didn't exist. The timelines were tight. Yet at the same time, no investor, no reporter was asking many questions because Milton told such a good story, projected it with such confidence, and the partnership deals also, they reinforced this perception. It really looked like Nikola was going to change the automotive industry and landscape, especially in relation to trucks. But it turns out that somebody was asking questions, that somebody was doing their own investigation. And it all blew up just 2 days after the GM announcement. On September 10th, Hindenburg Research, a company that I'm definitely going to do a story on, even though I know they've recently closed down, they released a bombshell report. It was titled, "Nikola, How to Parlay an Ocean of Lies into a Partnership with the Largest Auto OEM in America." OEM stands for Original Equipment Manufacturer. It called Nikola an intricate fraud built on dozens of lies, and it accused Nikola of faking tech claims, of exaggerating deals, and their claims were backed up by texts, emails, and crucially, by accounts from insiders. And they claimed that Nikola didn't make its own batteries or fuel cells, it hadn't developed its tech in-house, that Milton was routinely misleading investors. But most damning of all was their claim that a viral video that was released in 2018 by Nikola, which seemed to show their truck driving on a flat road in the desert, it was actually manipulated because it was a non-functioning truck that was really rolling down a hill. Now, I would really recommend our listeners to go look at this video, because you'll watch it and you'll see, oh wow, you see this big beautiful truck on a straight road and it's motoring along. But it's all a forgery, a manipulation. Now, Nikola initially hit back. They said that it was a hit job by short sellers. But crucially, they admitted that that video of the truck on a straight road had in fact been manipulated, that it wasn't driving on its own power. And that admission alone, it validated the entire Hindenburg report. And the fallout was swift and damning. I mean, by mid-September, both the SEC and the Department of Justice launched investigations. Nikola's stock plunged 25% within a few days. The GM deal hadn't closed yet. It was non-binding, and GM was obviously rethinking everything. 10 days later, after the report on September 20th, Trevor Milton resigned. In a statement, he said, "Nikola is truly in my blood and always has been. But the focus should be on the company and its world-changing mission, not me." Now, because of the circumstances, he forfeited $166 million in stock awards and a $20 million consulting deal. But he did hold on to his shares, which, up to a few days previously, had been worth billions. Now, at the same time that he announced his resignation, 2 women filed sexual abuse allegations against Milton. One of them was a relative. The alleged abuse happened years previously. Both women were only 15 years old at the time of the abuse. And eventually no charges were brought against Milton, not due to lack of evidence or anything, but due to the statute of limitations. Nikola's stock, which had once soared above 70, was now in the teens. Investors had been burnt. The Budweiser deal, that order, that faded into silence. Nikola was in a pretty bad way, with lawsuits looming, and really its credibility was in tatters. In July 2021, Milton himself was indicted by the US Department of Justice for securities and wire fraud. Prosecutors were able to make the case that Milton used his TV appearances on podcasts, social media, to claim that Nikola had a fully functional prototype. It's there. You can listen to it. You go and see the videos, listen to the podcast. He did say that they had a vertically integrated hydrogen production system, and they had billions in binding pre-orders. None of it was real. Prosecutors alleged Milton of targeting retail investors that were caught up in the 2020 market frenzy, if you remember that. And many of them would later testify that they lost their life savings. And meanwhile, Milton's own paper net worth went up to over $8.5 billion. So the motive, they said, was pretty simple: ego and greed. Milton, they say, built a fantasy to boost the stock price and, of course, his image. Now, Milton's legal team, they pushed back. They said Trevor Milton is innocent, and they called the prosecution case faulty and incomplete. They said he was simply a passionate founder, not a fraudster. The trial opened in September 2020, and jurors watched the infamous video. I mean, in reality, the truck actually had to be towed uphill before it was filmed rolling downhill. The prototype itself, it was a shell. There were no gears, there wasn't any motor, there was no control system, and testimony from Nikola executives and employees really bolstered the case for the prosecution. For example, CEO Mark Russell, he told jurors that Milton was, and I quote, prone to exaggeration, that's putting it mildly, and that the board had taken Milton off social media to stop the damage. CFO Kim Brady described how Milton obsessed over the company's stock price and how he falsely claimed that Nikola was producing cheap hydrogen fuel, and how he pitched the Nikola Badger pickup truck without revealing that internal projections showed that it would lose $3.2 billion. Also, according to Brady, the company executives had warned Milton everything he said publicly counted as a regulatory filing, but he just ignored them. Milton, they said, really was more interested in fame than accuracy. He was desperate to become the Elon Musk of trucking. Now, of course, Milton's defense, he simply believed what he said. Nikola had real products, they argued. And yeah, maybe he'd gotten carried away, but that wasn't fraud, it was just optimism. Fortunately, the jury didn't buy that. And in October 2020, Milton was found guilty on 3 counts, 2 of wire fraud and 1 of securities fraud. And the verdict was clear. Milton had crossed the line from hype to deception. As the prosecutor said, fake it till you make it is not an excuse for fraud. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, a $1 million fine, and the forfeiture of millions in fraudulent assets, including his ranch and other assets. The company itself, the new leadership, they desperately tried to distance themselves from Milton. They settled civil charges with the SEC, paying $125 million. They tried to recover some money from Milton. They hit him with a suit and he was deemed to owe the company $165 million, which he's never paid. The company did begin delivering the Nikola tray truck, but the trust in the company, it was shattered by then. And in 2025, Nikola filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It was a total loss. But then comes the twist in this whole story. You see, Trevor Milton never went to jail. By early 2025, he was still out on bond. He was awaiting an appeal. And then he had another plan in place. Milton and his wife had donated $1.8 million to Donald Trump's 2024 presidential campaign. And on March 28, 2025, just a few weeks ago, President Trump issued a full presidential pardon. Milton wrote on social media, so he's back on social media. He said, "I've been granted a full pardon. The greatest comeback story in America is about to happen." And he thanked Trump for granting me this sacred pardon of innocence. I mean, where's the innocence here? The backlash was immediate. Investor advocates, of course, were furious. Because, look, Milton's conviction was based on evidence. It wasn't political. There were real victims here. There was real damage and there was real fraud. And as I said before, if you want to get a deeper dive into this, listen to the Bad Bets podcast, where they do, I think it's 5 or 6 episodes. And they really show you the type of character that Trevor Milton is. Now, the pardon also meant that Milton would avoid paying any restitution to Nikola or to its investors. I'm not going to get too political on this. Trump defended the decision, calling Milton highly recommended by many people and blaming his prosecution on political bias. According to President Trump, they say the thing he did wrong was support Donald Trump. Milton leaned in. He claimed prosecutors were liars, judges were biased, and promised to tell his side of the story. He called it a victory for free speech and innovation. I mean, bullshit. That's all I've got to say to that. But look, this is his legacy, at least for those who are familiar with the evidence. It's the story of a hype man, a fraudster, a shyster. I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. But there's no denying that the whole Nikola saga, it makes for a great business story. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And remember, if you have any comments, any corrections, or any story that you'd like us to cover, email us at info@gbspod.com. All the best, folks.